Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everybody, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is Frank Joeseph, and he's a researcher, investigator, and author of many books on ancient America, lost worlds, and America lost, basically he's proven through many of his novels that Christopher Columbus was not the first one to visit America, and he's got, various books on it about Atlantis and the Mayan Prophecy 2012, and he's put out a chapter in a book by New Page Books called Lost Civilization, which is a anthology of many different topics connected with ancient mysteries. And his particular chapter in that is called Archaeological Scandals, and we're going to talk a little bit about his chapter in that today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a new book that he's also recently put on the market, titled 2012 Alien Revelation, that I see it's available in Kindle edition at Amazon. I'm not sure if it's also in paperback or not. I didn't take time to go through the site and look for both. I kind of came to the first one I did, could, because I was in a rush to get to the show. But he can probably tell us that also as well. And this is also Frank's second time on my show. So Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm very glad to be here, Royce. It's very kind of you to invite me back a second time.
Oh, I enjoyed having you the first time, and I'm definitely happy that you came back, and especially to talk to us about that new book about 2012, because there's been a lot of talk about that. And one of the things that I noticed in the description of the book was that there was something that the person that you write about discovers a horrifying secret of the Mayan prophecy. Now, I'm not sure if that part was part of the fiction or the nonfiction, but I wanted to talk to you about that in a few minutes after we, get past the lost civilizations. But that part in particular, if it was in actuality, was something I thought you might elaborate on, in other words.
I'd be happy to.
So, at any rate, why don't you tell us a little something about the lost civilization chapter? I read that before the show, and I noticed that there's been you're not the only one that's said, for example, that the Smithsonian does not acknowledge all archaeological finds that comes, across its paths. In other words, I've read articles that there's been archaeological finds in the Grand Canyon that had indications that it came from ancient Egypt that supposedly the Smithsonian would not accept or would not acknowledge. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little something about this.
Well, the Smithsonian Institution is a wonderful organization. It's a fabulous museum, and they've done a lot of great stuff. In my chapter, I take the Smithsonian to task on a number of things, but it's important, I think, for readers and listeners to understand that there are just some people, some directors of the Smithsonian who have misused this colossal organization that has done mostly good and have done some terrible things in its name. And one of them is something that you've brought up, and that is a discovery that was made in the year 1909 in the Grand Canyon. And at that time, actually in 1908, the Smithsonian Institution commissioned a famous photographer. His name was G.E. Kincaid. G.E. Kincaid was a protege of Ansel Adams. He was an early 20th century nature photographer, and because of his background, the Smithsonian wanted him to make the first photographic record of the Grand Canyon, specifically of the Colorado River as it winds through the Grand Canyon. So Kincaid accepted, and in 1909 alone, he was possibly the first man that ever went through the entire length of the Colorado River, because it's a very dangerous river, and Native Americans have traditionally regarded certain areas of the Grand Canyon as off-limits, as places of evil, where they do not go. So Kincaid even went through those areas, and he had a number of mishaps and so on, but he did make it, and he was taking his photographs when he arrived in a very remote area of the canyon and was attracted to one particular cliff. He noted that on this cliff there was an unusual stain, and he docked his little boat and left his photographic equipment in it, and then went to investigate what caused this stain, which he had not seen on any other cliff in the Grand Canyon. And the climb up towards this cliff was not difficult at all. He could walk up without having to go any vertical cliff faces to get up to it. And he was amazed to find that he was eventually climbing some man-made steps, stone steps. He was amazed because, so far as he had been informed, no one had ever been in this area of the Grand Canyon before. He was something in the nature of a discoverer. This area that he was in, by the way, is still off limits to persons who visit the Grand Canyon today. You are not allowed to go there under federal law. You have to have a permit from the authorities of the Grand Canyon in order to go to the same area that G.E. Kincaid visited. He climbed these steps, these rather easy, broad steps, to the mouth of a large cavern. And inside this cavern, he brought along, I guess, a rudimentary flashlight, a carbide flashlight. This is, I guess, just when batteries were invented or were just about to be invented. And he entered the cavern and was astounded to see that this cavern was a network of corridors, as he reported in the Arizona Gazette. We'll get to that later. He's all on record with this, in newspaper record. And this network of corridors led to chambers, man-made carved chambers. They were carved out of the natural rock. Large chambers, very large. One of the chambers he described as a kind of a dormitory, and the largest chamber of all was similar to a cafeteria with tables and chairs and so forth. He entered another large room that was filled with munitions, edged weapons, swords, spears, armor, shields, and so forth, by the many hundreds stacked up. The most amazing room, though, was the smallest, which was still pretty substantial. And in this one room, which had a high dome ceiling, there was a circular altar, as he described it. And around the base of this altar were a number of small figurines that he described as rather demonic or devilish looking. And sitting on the altar was a very large statue. Now, Kincaid was a photographer, but he was not an archaeologist, so he could not describe. He did describe the statue, but he was unable to identify what culture it could be. And from his description, it sounds either Egyptian. It sounds like a possible statue of the god Bes, B-E-S. He was the god of merriment, the ancient Egyptian god of entertainment, as it were, in the form of a dwarf sticking out his tongue. However, from his description, this statue might also have been something from India. But in any case, it was utterly unlike anything that had been used or made by Native Americans.
Right.
And he returned to his boat and then went back to the cavern with a large lantern, he said. And in the lantern light, which was able to illuminate the interior of this tremendous space much better, he saw that the walls were covered with thousands upon thousands of hieroglyphs. Again, he's not an archaeologist. He couldn't describe what culture was associated with it, but they were unreadable hieroglyphs, just completely covering the walls of the interior. He went then back to his boat. He completed his mission, his photographic mission of documenting the Grand Canyon. And the moment that he finally made it back to civilization, he was contacted by the Arizona Gazette, just wanted to see how successful his trip was. It was going to be a small article. Instead, they gave him front-page coverage of his discovery, which he describes in quite good detail. Subsequent issues of the Arizona Gazette dealing with this, they came out in April of 1909. Subsequent issues told about a fellow by the name of Jordan, Jordan, who was sent with a team of investigators from Washington, D.C. These were all Smithsonian Institution investigators, that they returned to this spot. Kincaid led them back to the cavern. Once there, they laid down a small railroad track, and on this railroad track, they put a miner's cart or carts, and they filled these carts with literally thousands of artifacts, pottery, human remains, bones, all kinds of things. And then they sealed up the cavern's mouth with a great iron door. And that's it. Nobody has heard anything about it since. Of course, World War I came along not too long after that, and that sort of helped to obscure things. But people have been wondering ever since, well, what was this all about? Was the Arizona Gazette, which is a newspaper still around today, it's on record. These articles are on record, a series of articles, and the front page coverage is the most interesting one because that's where Kincaid enumerates all these details of his find. If you call the Smithsonian today, as really quite a few people have over the decades, they're told the same story. They don't know anything about it. There was never a G.E. Kincaid, a photographer. There never was a fellow by the name of Jordan who ever worked for the Smithsonian. And it's all probably a newspaper hoax. They don't know anything about it at all. So we did some investigation on that. We found out that G.E. Kincaid most certainly did exist. We've been able to track down some of his photographs. He was a prominent photographer in the early part of the 20th century. I even tracked down his great-grandson, and I talked to his great-grandson. He says, yes, of course my great-grandfather exists because here I am, and we know about this story. It's been in our family as long as he can remember. I also tracked down that Mr. Jordan also existed, at least up until 1927. He was one of the curators at the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian themselves don't even look at their own records, or they're just not telling the truth. The last that was heard about this is that we were able to pretty well narrow. Well, I worked for a magazine called Ancient American, and Ancient American investigates things like this. It deals with the prehistory of America. In the last part of the 20th century, we wanted to go find that place. And we did narrow it down pretty much where it exists. And it does exist in an area that is off limits. There actually are quite a few areas of the Grand Canyon that are prescribed you cannot go into without permits because they are very dangerous. People can get killed there. And it'll be very hard to rescue somebody and very costly to do that. So it's understandable. But this area, we couldn't get into because you couldn't get a permit. We did learn around the year 1999 or 2000 that there was a husband and wife who also narrowed the area down and did find the cavern and did find the steps, walked the same steps that Kincaid climbed exactly as he described. And the cavern was covered, they said, with an old rusty iron door, two gates, and chains across them, and that they had just arrived. They were only there like for about 10 or 15 minutes when a park helicopter showed up, and a loudspeaker over the helicopter said that they were in violation of federal statutes and they had to leave the area immediately. And the authorities eventually they detained this husband and wife. They did not arrest them. They confiscated their cameras, returned their cameras minus any film, and didn't press charges. But that's as far as we've ever been able to go. Definitely this place exists, just like Kincaid said. Kincaid really did exist himself, and so did Mr. Jordan, but nothing has been disclosed by the Smithsonian. So what are we to think? That all those artifacts that were taken out, were they destroyed, or were they dumped in the ocean or something? Or are they still sitting in the basement of the Smithsonian? Are they even properly classified? Who knows? But that is a real documented case where the Smithsonian, people at the Smithsonian were involved in a deliberate physical cover-up. It's not the only one.
I was about to say that actually that one there was, I don't remember it being mentioned in Lost Civilizations. It was something I read on the web a year or two ago. But you've mentioned at least another 2 or 3 cases in your chapter on archaeological scandals, haven't you?
Well, the trouble with the Smithsonian is if it was only this one incident, it would be bad enough. But as a consistent record of cover-up, one of the worst things they've ever done was when the Kensington runestone was first found. The Kensington runestone was discovered in the year 1898 by a Swedish immigrant farmer. And while he was plowing up his land in central Minnesota, and he found an old dead tree that had to be uprooted, and as he did so, he found entangled in the roots a large boulder. The boulder was covered with runic writing. Runic writing is the writing system that was used by the Vikings and people before them, just the Norse, Northern Europeans, starting about 600 or 700 A.D., all the way up actually to modern times. So he took this stone, which he couldn't read, of course, brought it into town, and it caused the nearest town was Kensington, Minnesota. It caused a lot of interest, and eventually scholars from the University of Minnesota came and identified the stone as, yes, this is definitely inscribed in a runic alphabet, and they were able to read the story that was on it. And basically the story was a memorial, supposedly, a memorial to people who had sailed from Scandinavia, from Sweden, Northmen and Goths, who had arrived in Minnesota via the Great Lakes and the river systems that were far more navigable at that time than they are now, and had arrived there in, I believe it was 1421. So, no, excuse me, this was in the 14th century. It was about 1362. And in 1362, they supposedly arrived. This is long, of course, before Columbus was even born. This stone was then sent to the Smithsonian. It was a good thing to do for further analysis. Now, the farmer, his name was Olof Ehrman, even though he was an uneducated farmer, was intelligent enough to know that the stone should be preserved in its original context. That as much involving its discovery physically should be preserved as possible. So he left the roots entangled around the stone and the original dirt. All that would help to date the stone, to verify the date that this stone, or at least its antiquity. So when the Smithsonian got it, and they certainly knew this too, this is before radiocarbon dating tests, but nonetheless, original materials like roots and dirt could be helped to authenticate the stone. Everybody knew that, even back then in the 19th century. What the Smithsonian did, they removed the roots and they scrubbed the entire stone clean with kerosene, making it completely impossible to identify its authenticity or not. And after they had done that, they declared it a fraud. Well, there wasn't any way that you could verify it after they had done that.
Right.
And the Smithsonian had been involved in other things, and I enumerate a couple of things in the article, as you say, but we could have a very long and dismal conversation on what the Smithsonian has done about sabotaging American prehistory. That's because history is politics, and people don't realize that until you get involved in the making of history or the uncovering of history. Then you see quite clearly and soon that interpretations of history are very dangerous politically. At least that's the way they've evolved in this country, unfortunately.
Actually, I think it's just about everywhere that I could think of, but I could be wrong. But I wanted to also mention there has a question in the chat room. This was wanting to know if there was any reason for the Smithsonian to cover this up.
Yes, there was a very important reason why they would want to cover this up. This stone especially. When the stone was examined in the early part of this century, in the 21st century, by geologists, the geologist in charge, his name was Scott Walter. And Scott Walter is a world-class geologist. He runs his own award-winning geological laboratory in St. Paul, Minnesota. He investigated the Kensington runestone for years and was absolutely able to establish its authenticity beyond a shadow of a doubt from geological reasons. And one of the things that he was able to determine is that the stone, although it is a memorial to these people that had come here in the 14th century, at the same time, it is also what is known as a land claim. The reason why the Scandinavians came as far away as Minnesota wasn't for kicks or just to get away or even exploration. They came because they were on a mission to find new land They needed to find new land because at that time, in the 14th century, Scandinavia, all of northern Europe, I think probably all of Europe at that time, was being beset by the bubonic plague, that there were epidemics breaking out that were killing tens of thousands of people. And the king, his name was Magnus at that time, dispatched an exploratory team to try to find some place where his royal family could go if things got so bad that he had to leave his own kingdom, someplace far away from disease-ridden Europe. And that is why that stone is there. And Scott Walter, in his excellent book called The Hooked X, makes it abundantly clear that that is why that stone was erected. Now, if that's the case, that means that actually Sweden does have claim to territory in our country legally. And that is one reason why that stone is not divulged. To give you another example of that, as recently as last year, 2011, in Iowa, another farmer found a stone, not as dramatic as the Kensington rune stone, and this farmer also had enough sense to leave it alone. He just left it there. He informed the state archaeologist. The state archaeologist of Iowa came out, examined the stone, said it was absolutely an authentic Norse stone, inscribed stone. And the Smithsonian, or rather the state archaeologist of Iowa said, I will have nothing to do with, I'm paraphrasing him now very closely, I will have nothing to do with foreigners trying to claim territory in America. And the stone was reburied. It's reburied on this guy's property. The state archaeologists have nothing to do with it. So there are concerns. Apparently, there may be some legalistic claim that they're concerned about, and maybe such legalistic claims really exist. I don't know. But nonetheless, the Kensington rune stone is a land claim stone, which apparently archaeologists are afraid have too many possibilities of Sweden invading Minnesota, which I would welcome, quite honestly. We've had invasions from other parts of the world that are not quite as salubrious, but I would like to, if the Swedes want to come to Minnesota, I live in Minnesota myself. I'd love to have them come. If they want to claim if they want to claim Kensington, Minnesota for their own, I think America's big enough, that would be okay. But I'm sure that people like that, the Smithsonian and the state archaeologist of Iowa, feel that something like that would set a dangerous precedent.
Right. Now, also, one of the things I was going to mention is I read in your book, or in the Lost Civilizations, that in all actuality, there is evidence out there that we were actually, America was actually visited as far back as, 4,000 years?
Well, it goes back tens of thousands of years, actually. It's an incredible story. But there's abundant evidence to show that the Sumerians were here. Now that's an astounding statement to make. The Sumerians are the first known civilized people. They raised the first city-states in the 4th millennium BC. Amazing. In other words, about 3,500 years before Christ. And one of the things the Sumerians did is that they had the first known written language, and in cuneiform. In cuneiform are these little wedge-shaped letters that they invented and used, and they put them mostly on tablets, little stone tablets or baked tablets. And they use them mostly for receipts or for prayers, things like that. Well, these little tablets have been found in North America. And the most remarkable of them all was stolen from Chief Joeseph. Chief Joeseph was the head of the Nez Perce Indian tribe, and when his tribe was defeated by the U.S. cavalry and he was taken captive, one of his captors saw that around Chief Joseph's neck was this little pouch, and the soldier broke it off of his neck, confiscated the pouch. And inside the pouch, they're known as medicine bags. Inside the pouch were a number of strange objects, feathers, bones, and so forth. And one of the objects found was this little stone tablet that was inscribed on both sides at that time, this would be about 1840, a completely unreadable language. Of course, it was cuneiform. Nobody could read it back then. And so they asked Chief Joseph, what's this? And he says, this tablet was given to our family and our tribe a very, very long time ago by these other white men. You are not the first white man to have arrived here in North America. And it was given to him by these visitors who were far kinder to us than you are to us now. And so much so that they intermarried with my tribe. And some of their blood is in our tribe, in the Nez Perce tribe, and that this stone is a memorial that was given to us at that time. The stone is now in Annapolis, of all places, the Annapolis Naval Museum, and has been translated. The stone is unquestionably an authentic Sumerian tablet. It is a prayer to the moon god and is dated to more than 4,000 years ago. Now, where did Chief Joseph get this? Archaeologists don't ask, but we do know the story. He said it was given to his ancestors as a token by these white men who had sailed across the Atlantic Ocean a very long time ago. This tablet, the Chief Joseph tablet, which is at the Annapolis Museum, is by no means the only Sumerian tablet that has been found in North America. There have been literally dozens of these stones that have been found under tremendously authentic conditions. Another one was found in eastern Tennessee by a woman digging in her garden. That's known as the Hearn tablet. And archaeologists will tell you, this is the bizarre thing about all this. Mainstream archaeologists will say, yeah, these stones are all authentic. They're not fake. They're the real thing. They all go back about 4,000 years ago. But it doesn't mean anything because probably people, collectors of these items, just lost them. Or they were just sort of thrown around and people didn't really care about them. What? These are like precious artifacts that some of them are very costly, and they're just being sprinkled around like cheap bubble gum. It's rather unbelievable. But archaeologists have this line drawn in the sand. Nothing before 1492. They're not even interested in anything that happened before 1492. American history begins with the discovery of America by Columbus, and anything before that is of no significance whatsoever. That is what is taught in school. That's the basis of American history. And anything happened before then were just Indians with bows and arrows, and that's about all. But yet we're finding these Sumerian artifacts, these cuneiform tablets, not only in North America, but in South America, in Peru. There's a bowl that was found in Peru. The inside of this bowl has cuneiform script. Not too far away from this bowl found in Peru was also found a statue, and on its legs are inscribed Sumerian cuneiform. Both of these objects are in what's known as the Gold Museum in Peru. It's an amazing story, but we hear nothing about it. This is our prehistory, but it's denied us.
Right. Now, also, I wanted to mention to everybody real quick before I forget, if y'all would like to call in and you're not listening to the show, because on the show page, the number's below the chat room. But for those of you that are say Shoutcast or iTunes, or your smartphones, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. And also, if you want to learn more about Mr. Joseph, he has a website at www.mysticvalleymedia.com, and I'll be putting
Royce, I hate to interrupt you on that, but that is no longer in operation. That Mystic Valley Media, I'm sorry, I should have notified you about that in advance, but I forgot about that. What I suggest people do is if anyone is interested in these subjects, there is a website they can go to. It's not just for my own work, but for others that are working in the same direction. It's www.ancientamerican.com.
Okay, now also, Les was just asking another question in the chat room. He's the one that asked the last one. Now, this one was a little bit more specific. He was asking earlier about why Smithsonian would want to hide finds, but now he's asking about why the Smithsonian would want to hide the Grand Canyon find, the one about the Egyptians in particular.
Why they would want to hide that, The only way I can describe that is that the Smithsonian was run by a man by the name of John Wesley Powell at that time. John Wesley Powell was the most powerful scientist of his day. Powerful meaning that he was politically connected. He could walk into the White House any time. So he was more than just an archaeologist or a scientist. And John Wesley Powell was a fanatic abolitionist who took his abolitionist ideas all across the board. And he regarded any so-called arguments about foreigners from other parts of the world arriving in North America before 1492 as detrimental to the well-being of the Native Americans, even though the Native Americans themselves, like Chief Joseph, still talk about these foreigners that came across the seas in ancient times. Sometimes they were friends and sometimes they were enemies, but these were things that really happened. But John Wesley Powell laid down the law, and he said literally that any information, any so-called discoveries or artifacts tending to talk about foreigners in America before 1492 is to be discarded as worthless, as having no merit, and that only artifacts and objects from 1492 on are to be considered. Now that is the law, that is the dogma, that is part of education from anyone that wants to become an archaeologist. These other ideas simply are not discussed.
Okay. And also, I think it was James was asking, how do you think these artifacts made it into America in the first place?
Well, they made it in many different ways, but generally they all arrived by people who had come here either as castaways or because they were here for very deliberate, specific reasons. And I think the important thing to understand is that America was a kind of a melting pot long before the Statue of Liberty was erected. That the oceans of the ancient world were not barriers between people, but highways. And that people like the Egyptians, for example, that could create the Great Pyramid, which society can't even build today. It's a tremendous achievement of high math and great construction techniques. To deny these people the ability to make a ship that could cross the ocean is preposterous. Of course they had ships that could do this. So I think they arrived in a number of different ways. Sometimes they did arrive as castaways. The Atlantic Ocean is not an easy crossing. I don't mean to say that, but it is possible. And then they came here for very specific things. For example, we do know that the ancient foreigners came to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for copper. They were great copper miners, that they extracted more than 250 million pounds of the world's highest grade copper, which disappeared from North America and reappeared in Europe during the Bronze Age. It was copper that fueled the Bronze Age. Copper was the nuclear fission of its day. They also came for cocaine, not to here, but to Peru. The mummies that have been found since about 1990 that have been examined in the Cairo Museum, a great number of these mummies are found to contain trace elements of cocaine and tobacco, which originated only in Peru and in Bolivia. And that's because cocaine was used for medical purposes and also for spiritual purposes. Cocaine was used as a mind-altering narcotic to achieve altered states of consciousness for spiritual revelation. It was not what they call a recreational drug, the way it's referred to here. It was also used for medicine. The Egyptians were great physicians. So yes, people definitely came from the ancient world to America for specific goods and minerals that were necessary for them.
Well, that's understandable. But also, while you're mentioning that about people visiting ancient America, I thought I'd mention to all the listeners out there that this coming Saturday at 1, my guest, Gaben Menzies, is going to be talking about why he believes Atlantis was where the ancient Minoans in Crete was at. And he's uncovered some evidence of the ancient Minoans actually coming to the Americas to do, I think it was actually copper trade, if I remember from the radio interview I heard of him on somebody else's show. And I thought we were talking about that. It fit right in there, so I thought I'd mention that for everybody. If y'all want to come back Saturday, we'll get to hear what he's discovered on the Atlantis end of it. Now, also, before we get out of here, we still got another 30 minutes or so. I want to make sure we got enough time to talk about this new upcoming book you have, Alien Revelation 2012. Now, do you have that also in audio as well as Kindle?
No, it's just on Kindle. It's called 2012 Alien Revelation, and it's only in Kindle at this point. It's not a paperback or anything like that. It's completely different than what we've been discussing here, and I'm even hesitant to really discuss it too much, but it was something I felt I really had to do. Some years ago, I met a man. Well, I didn't just meet him. I've known this fellow all his life since he was very small. And I have a great deal of respect for this fellow. He is a very brilliant creature. He has a lot of integrity. He's a very decent man. And it's one of the very few people in life that I could really entrust my life with. He's just a very decent fellow. He's married and has a wonderful family and so forth. And I was shocked some years ago when he shared with me some experiences that he had had all his life until he turned 30. And he had told me that he had been literally abducted by these strange beings since he was a child, a very small child. If anybody else had told me this story, I would have just laughed it aside. I was not a believer in extraterrestrials or flying saucers or any of that stuff. I wasn't even particularly interested in any of that. But coming from a tremendous source like this, I was really shocked. And I've known about these stories for quite a few years, but he refused to allow me to write them up. And the reason why is he was afraid of ridicule and, well, the consequences of disclosing that are not always pleasant. He also didn't want the family involved in it in any way. So I have written them all up, but it's all in a novel form. I've changed, of course, his name, location, dates, and so forth. I've obscured everything, so it's impossible to understand, to ever figure out who this person was. Giving him a new name and an identity, I think, was the right cover. But I felt that this story, nonetheless, had to come out. I'd never heard anything like this before. He apparently had been abducted literally dozens of times, from a very small child all the way up until, like I say, he turned 30. Then they stopped abruptly because apparently his abductors were no longer interested in anything he had to offer. These were not pleasant experiences by any means. I don't believe this man is hallucinating in any way. I do not question his sanity in the least. I say that's what impressed me as being so astounding, that it would come from a source that I respected so much. And that's what the book is. The book is a novel, and there are fictional elements in it, to be sure, but the incidents that are described that's happening to him are all, I believe, absolutely true. Of course, there's no way he could document these things. Cameras not allowed, and he didn't have a notary republic with him when he was being carted away to who knows where. And he was ill-treated, terribly, horribly ill-treated, tortured, I guess you could say. It was kind of a torture. It's a story that I wanted to tell.
Okay. Now, I read the description for this over at Amazon.com, and by the way, I wanted to apologize to you and the listeners about the occasional cough. It's that time of year. Keep getting a frog in my throat, and I'm working the best I can until I get rid of the bug, in other words.
Well, you're a human being like the rest of us, so please feel free to cough to your heart's delight.
What I usually just try to mute it, but every now and then I get one in when I'm fixing to speak. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that doesn't help. But don't worry about it. Sounds fine.
Anyway, what I was going to say was, according to the description over at Amazon... Oh, wait, we got a call coming in. I'm going to try to hold that thought. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I think I recognize this voice.
Yes. How are you, sir?
Yep,
Hi.
it's Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer.
Good
Hi.
evening.
I was listening to the part where about the novel,
Yeah.
and I just have a lot of questions. May I?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, go right ahead.
Hi, sir. Okay. When the abduction took place, was there? You said it was very frightful for the young man.
Yes,
right?
it was.
But was there any information given, such as I don't know?
Yes, I know what you're saying. Yes, only on right. Only on one occasion he would ask occasionally who these people were, where they came from, what was going on. They wouldn't respond to him at all. They ignored. He was like a dumb animal as regarding them. There was, however, one occasion only, and that is he was sedated in a dark room. He'd been in this dark room many times. He was sitting in this room. It was very dark and very cold. There was no furniture, nothing except for a metal seat, a kind of a metal bench. And everything was metallic and very dim. It was hard to see. The light was coming from everywhere and from nowhere. And he was afraid, of course, but he had no control over the situation. And this one particular time only, he recalls, one of these beings, and they're described as, you've heard before many times, these little spindly characters with big heads and big black eyes. Well, that's what they call them, you know. And there's no sound, there's no communication physically. Everything is telepathic. They don't speak. They have little slits from mouth.
Very flat, apparently.
Right. They can't manipulate. They have no musculature, no facial expressions, nothing. However, according to my friend, his name in the book is Jonathan Brady, and Jonathan says that everything is telepathic. You can communicate with them. They know everything you're thinking, and you can talk back to them. But there's no vocal communication. So this one being came up to him, and the being was accompanied by two young women. One was a child. The other one was like a teenager, and they looked. These two young women were accompanied by one of the Greys, if you want to call them that, and this Grey brought these two young women to Jonathan Brady, who is seated in this dark room, and the being told Jonathan Brady, says, "These are your sisters," and Jonathan looked at them and saw that they looked very sedated, like they were comatose, like they were in a kind of a coma. They were able to walk, but they had no expression on their faces. They looked like they were almost sleepwalking. And
did they look humid or hybrid? They
looked hybrid. They looked hybrid. They looked mostly human, but they had some gray alien characteristics, like their heads were too large and their eyes were too big and dark and so forth. They resembled. They had human. The bodies looked totally human, but the shape of the head and so on, they didn't look altogether human. And so anyway, this alien told Jonathan Brady, says, "These are your sisters." Well, Jonathan Brady looked at them and he told the Gray, he says, "They are not my sisters. These are not my sisters." And the alien or the Gray says, "Yes, they are. They are your sisters." And Jonathan gets very angry at that point. He stands up. This is the first time that an incident like this had ever happened with him. He stands up and he demanded. He said, "No, these are not." He did in real life. Jonathan Brady did have two sisters in his family. He says he towered over the little alien and he very threateningly said, "Don't say that. These are not my sisters." And as that happened, another being came up, a squat little different being with a long stick, and this stick he applied to Jonathan Brady's head and knocked him out. just knocked him out.
That's the first time I hear such.
Yeah, he just touched him, and it was like a pain stick. It just knocked him out. And then the next thing he knew, he was back in his bed. What's interesting is that Jonathan Brady's wife, who I also interviewed, by the way, also had several encounters. She was never abducted.
Yes, because normally it goes by when they get married.
Yeah, but she was never abducted, but she witnessed him being abducted one time, and she also witnessed one of the craft that was following a train that he was on. He was on a commuter train going to work when not only she, but other commuters saw this hat. It looked like a hat, like a bowler hat type of a craft hovering right over the train.
Round?
Pardon me? Yeah, it was round. It was, yeah, and it was very unaerodynamic. She said it looked like a kind of a hat, like an old-fashioned hat, but it was large and it was dark, metallic, and it was following along the commuter train that Jonathan Brady was going to work on. And not only she saw it, but other people saw it as well. It's amazing. Yeah, that marriage, by the way, dissolved.
Of course, it's amazing. Did you hear of Jim Sparks?
Pardon me?
You know?
Yes, Jim Sparks.
You ever hear of Jim Sparks? That's right. He actually got abducted many, many times.
Uh-huh.
And pardon?
Yes, go ahead.
He gets abducted. He gets abducted maybe once every day. Close to once every day. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, my sister's going, oh my gosh, she's not believing all this. Okay, so so he gets abducted like almost every day for many, many years, and he has the privilege to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets to fly the ships. He gets to meet people from the military. He gets to meet people from all over the place. And once he met somebody from Florida, and he decided to move to Florida. And when he was just walking around and he was looking at this guy, and just, I know him somewhere. I know him from somewhere. I know him from somewhere. And he went up to him. He's like, "Hi, I know you." He's like, "Yeah, me too. I know you. You know." And so they started talking and talking and talking, and they're like, "Oh, that's where I met you on the ship." And at first, the man from Florida didn't know, but talking and talking and talking, eventually they came to the point where, yes, we met on the ship with the commander-in-chief from the military base from this place, and it's a whole story. Like, it's very fascinating, and it's very fascinating, these stories, and the thing is that with the sister to Jonathan Brady.
Yes.
The thing is that it's in the genetic code apparently, where you could actually go see if you could get if your family got I'm sorry, I'm French. Abducted. Thank you, Steph. Abducted, and so if it is his sisters, I mean, obviously one of his parents were abducted, and throughout the whole life year, like throughout the whole generation back, his whole family got abducted. That's because he has the regular genes. He has the true genes of nature. They're so pure.
It's a good point you raise. It does not appear, though, that anybody else in his family was abducted, that they concentrated only on Jonathan. It is interesting, though, that everybody in his family witnessed him being abducted at various times, but none of them could remember. Those memories were almost completely erased. As far as him with the sisters, the experiences that Jonathan had were mostly of genetic removal. He went through very painful operations regarding his reproductive organs. And it was even when he was very young, they were removing reproductive material from him. And they used no anesthesia. It was a very painful operation, but they could so immobilize him that he didn't move. They could do what they wanted with him. According to him, they have total command over human will, just absolute predominance over mental or our thought processes. But it's important to understand that there are probably various groups out there that have been coming here from time to time, and Jonathan's unfortunate encounters have to do with just one group that may not
That's
be
right.
all groups. But these creatures, they are just as cold as ice. They have
no feelings.
They have no feelings.
Hardship.
Have no feelings. They regard a human that they have as the same way you'd captured a fly. Probably
right.
Probably not even that much compassion. They have absolutely
they're like a bunch of psychopaths floating around.
Well, they just are totally detached completely, but they do have an agenda of some kind. And now the book doesn't intend to explain what that agenda is too much. There's some speculation in there. Jonathan, to this day, does not know what their goals were. Now, when he was very young, when he was just a toddler, he was being abducted. They didn't harm him, but they frightened him very badly. He used to refer to them as the evil clowns. He didn't know how else to explain them. But it was only after he began to mature, when he became a teenager, that these severe operations were initiated on him.
And the New World Order, how do you think that's going to go down? I mean, I don't know if you, there was this man that was working for the FBI. He got invited to a very high meeting, and he was sitting down, and 5 aliens came up and took the seat in front, and there was Bill Clinton, not Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and all these big wigs, and they were talking to them about New World Order and how it's going to go down, and the underground subways out in the States. So when the New World Order comes, we're going to be like slaves, and there's a bunch of we already have our rooms prepared, like our jail cells prepared and everything. How do you think about all that?
Well, I think that at the very least, American people are very suspicious. And the reason why there's so many conspiracy theories out there and so on is not because people are crazy, but because people are legitimately suspicious of the way the world is turning out. Maybe they're not entirely sure about the veracity of all these stories, but there's something true to them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be living in the kind of world that we do live in. So I think that there is more credence to these stories than the critics would bring out. I don't address that in the book. I try to keep the book as close to his experiences as possible, and so that's primarily what that is. I can't address myself to a New World Order. I would like to think that such a thing never happens, and that's what. But it's something to be considered. Yeah.
All right, so that's it.
Well, thank you very much for calling. A very interesting telephone call. Thanks for calling.
Thanks for calling, Jen.
Thank you, and thank you, sir. All right. Bye, sir.
We'll talk to you later. Okay. I was just fixing to ask you that one little question about Jonathan discovering a horrifying secret of the mind's prophecy.
Yeah.
Is that something you can share?
Yeah. The Maya prophecy doesn't speak well of the future. The Maya were a remarkable people. They invented this long count calendar, which I'm not going to go into because it's an incredibly complex, high mathematical construct. It's the most accurate calendar that's ever been invented. And the calendar, though, is based on 4 major events that took place in the past. And these 4 major events, the Maya said, were global catastrophes. And the reason why this calendar is made is so that people can prepare for the next catastrophe. what's interesting is that these global catastrophes that the Maya talked about have been documented by geophysicists, that in fact there were global catastrophes of the kind that are described by the Maya. And they say that based on the rotation of nature, on the cycles of time, that another catastrophe is in the offing for this year. This will be the end of the Maya calendar, which takes place on the rising of the sun on the winter solstice, which is our December 21st. And they say that something will happen, not necessarily on that day. That day is to be understood as an allegory, as a symbol. Because what is the winter solstice? The winter solstice is the longest night of the year. And night is associated with darkness, with ignorance, and fear. So the winter solstice is used as a symbol. What the Maya are saying is that the end of their calendar, which does end on the 21st of December 2012, signifies a kind of an event horizon, after which things will get really bad. And they say that there will be trouble with the sun. They are not specific. When I wrote a book about this, it's called Atlantis in 2012, I wanted to find out, when I wrote this book, what did the Maya themselves really say about 2012, not what did other people say that they said. And I found out from the original Maya sources what they had to say about it. The first time I learned about the Maya calendar was in 1986. That was my first trip to Mexico and to Yucatan, specifically to find out about ancient archaeology. And it was there that I met with some Maya elders at a place called Uxmal, which is in Yucatan. It's a beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful of all the Maya ceremonial centers. It was built over 1,000 years ago. And it was there that I met several Maya elders, and they shared with me for the first time I ever heard about it, their calendar, which they said would come to a close in 2012. It seemed a long time back then, but here we are. And they said there'll be trouble with the sun, and that it will be not the end of the world or the end of nature. Earth will survive. Earth will go on. What they're talking about is a very catastrophic period for human civilization and for human life. And the only things that I could really find that would parallel what they're talking about is what has just happened today. Today, there was one of the largest solar flares that have been recorded in recent history. And it doesn't do anybody any harm, except that it has a capacity to completely fry our civilization. When a solar flare erupts, even though it's 93 million miles away, it sends out so many particles known as negative ions that they can interface with electronic equipment. And that a large solar flare that took place, for example, in New York City in 1920, completely shut down public transportation for a short period of time and caused fires. An even larger event took place in 1859 and completely destroyed all telegraph communication across North America, United States and Canada, and Western Europe. That is known as a Carrington event. It was named after Richard Carrington, who is the great American astronomer who found out why all the telegraph wires in America caught fire and burned up all at once from New York to California. And that was because of this solar flare from the sun. Well, we are told that the sun is now going through a period in 2012 and 2013 of enormous solar activity that will result in possible a Carrington event. If a Carrington event happened today, it wouldn't bother you physically at all. It would be no effect. But it would completely turn off your electrical civilization completely. You won't even be able to flush your toilet because even that runs on electricity. Elevators will stop. Aircraft won't be able to fly because they run on avionics. This last solar storm that happened today, all flights across the Arctic were canceled because they knew that if airliners flew over the Arctic Circle when the solar storm is on, their avionics would go out. They would not be able to navigate. They would crash. They wouldn't be able to communicate. This was a small, little solar storm that took place today. If an event like the Carrington event in 1859 took place today, elevators would stop. Your hospitals would only be able to function for about another 3 or 4 days on their insulin that they have. Public communication would stop. There would be no television. We wouldn't be able to talk on the telephone. Computers would fry up. It would be very difficult for our civilization to come back from something like that. It's a very real fear, a very real concern amongst NASA. All you have to do is go on the NASA website, www.nasa.org, and look up Carrington event and see how serious they take it. They take it very seriously. And if there's a Carrington event in 2012, as the Maya said, it won't destroy the Earth, won't have any effect on us all, but it could potentially destroy our civilization. It could fry our civilization.
Well, that's pretty much bad enough to suit me. Or should I say worse than I want?
It's worse than you need to know. But it's amazing that the Maya could have predicted something like this 2,000 years ago. How could they have done such a thing? How could they have achieved such a knowledge of the future? Well, one reason why was because they were great observers of nature, and they believed that nature ran in cycles, and if they were great students of these cycles of time, perhaps they could make some legitimate predictions for the future. I don't know. That's speculation. I don't know. But the fact remains that the end of the Maya calendar, which is set for our next winter solstice on December 21st, should not be regarded as a date where something will happen exactly on that day, because it's not meant that way. The winter solstice is symbolic. It's allegorical of a period where we can expect bad things afterwards. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. The Maya did leave a loophole for us, though, an escape clause. They believe that human beings, that the energy that human beings put out through their behavior is inextricably connected with everything else in the universe. They believe that everything in the universe was one great web, and what you do to one end of the web affects the rest of the web. And believe that if human beings get their act together, if they follow the laws of nature again, that they can avoid all catastrophes in the future. But if human beings are so out of sync with the very forces of nature that brought them into existence, they go through these global catastrophes that downsizes radically their population. And that's why these global catastrophes happened in the past, the Maya said, because human beings had become so arrogant, they thought they could become masters of nature, they could do anything they wanted, that nature snapped back on them and almost wiped them out, pushed them to the brink of extinction. And they came back, they started to rebuild, they were virtuous for a while, but then they forgot, they got self-indulgent, and started the cycle again. They say that this is the last cycle for us now, this is it. So we'll see what happens. I don't expect to see anything happen as the sun rises on December 21st, because that is a symbolic time. But I do expect to see things happen after that. We're seeing things happening now. I don't think I can't imagine anybody in the world, very few people in the world today, especially in America, who can't see that our society is in deep difficulty, prolonged deep difficulty. Some people believe we're in free fall, morally, economically, politically, militarily. This is a very particularly serious time for us. Doesn't seem to be any quick fix involved. So this is maybe part of the decline that the Maya said would affect the world in 2012, beginning in 2012.
Well, like you said, time will definitely tell. Now, we've rode over just a little bit here, so I'm going to try to wrap. We got about maybe 3 more questions here between me and the chat room here. One of them I was going to ask was, is your book, it's already available on Amazon, isn't it, on the 2012 Alien Revelation?
Yes, sir. It's on Amazon.com. They should go to the Kindle section and or Kindle or books, and they can get it.
Okay. Now, also, we had a couple questions from the chat room, and I copied them while I was waiting, and I didn't copy who asked them, so I'm just going to go ahead and go with the questions and not be able to tell you who was it asked. But one of them was asking me to ask you if you think there's good evidence of alien civilizations and artifacts in the New World, North America?
I can't answer that directly. There are some things we might want to interpret, perhaps, that might be evidence of that, but I can't point to any that I feel confident about. So I have to be honest and say no.
And I just thought about it. That was Les that wrote it. I happen to remember. And it was also him that wrote, didn't the Olmecs actually create the Mayan calendar?
That's a really good point, of course. The Olmecs had the calendar. I didn't have time to get into this, of course. The Maya themselves say that they are the custodians of this calendar that was bequeathed to them by an earlier people. The Olmecs also had this calendar. The Olmec, and we don't have the same kind of records with them, but with the Maya, they say that this calendar arrived from over the sea, was delivered to them by a great man called Kukulkan, or the Feathered Serpent, and that he was in the possession of a very high science, and he gave the calendar along with the rest of the science to the Maya ancestors.
Okay. Now that description would sound a lot to me like the Sumerian god Enki. I think he also used to be known as a feathered serpent, didn't he?
Well, Enki was a very similar god to Kukulkan, in that he was also a sea god, and so that Enki was he was associated with the oceans as Kukulkan came across the Atlantic Ocean. So there are parallels, yes, absolutely.
All righty. Well, listen, Frank, it's been a very fascinating hour, and I really think if we'd had a couple hours ago, we could have probably kept going. Goodness knows there's a lot of things in ancient history that, not just from America, but Sumeria, Egypt, etc., that a lot of people don't know about, that haven't made a public mainstream, things that people would rather not be known, that have certain agendas, etc. I mean, it's been theorized more than one that history could actually be rewrote. I would personally love to have you come back on my show in the future if you have time, and if you don't mind coming, and we can maybe pick a time where we have a little more time to go into, better detail and just relax and, open up with some people.
Well, anytime, Royce. I am very grateful for the opportunity, and of course, just you let me know, and please consider me at your disposal.
And I also want to thank everybody in the listening audience for participating, asking questions, and being part of what makes the show work. And I'd also like to remind everybody out there listening that you can listen to the show live and join chat at www.paranormalpalace.com. And any of y'all looking for a place on the web to belong, where there's friendly people, a lot of good researchers and good information, and that's, nice folks, not a lot of flaming and arguing going on. I recommend United Paranormal International. We kind of, put a good word in for each other as we go. So that was my duty for that one. But they're really good folks over there. I've been with them for 2 or 3 years. And Frank, I want to thank you very much, and everybody else. Have a good night. And we'll see y'all this Saturday. Don't forget, we're going to be talking about Atlantis and about my knowings over here in America, Gabe and Menzies. And I hope to see y'all back then. You have a good night, Frank.
Good night, too, Royce.
Bye-bye.